Good evening, I'm Anna Musi, Interim Executive Director of the Driehaus Museum. Welcome to our third episode of Live from the Drawing Room and another glimpse into the Gilded Age. As the museum's home today, we steward the Nickerson Mansion in the spirit in which it was built in 1883, and as it was preserved by our founder, Richard H. Driehaus, as a place to entertain, a center of excellence in art, architecture, and design, and an incubator for creativity. This program is our way of stepping back with you into the salon era, which offered evenings just like this, filled with enlightening conversation, stylish entertainment, and beautiful music. Tonight we look at many examples of how in the late 19th and early 20th century, form began to triumph over function in every aspect of design. On behalf of our talented production team, thank you for watching, sharing these episodes with friends, and for every donation that brings us one step closer to creating another episode that you won't want to miss. Tonight's lineup is worthy of at least 2 cocktails, so let's start mixing it up with the cocktail guy. Please sit back and relax while we transcend you into the aesthetic movement with a feast for your senses. Take it away, Greg.
Thank you, Anna. Hi, I'm Greg Shutters, Associate Director of Retail and Branding here at the Driehaus Museum. I'm so glad you've joined us here tonight. And why don't we start off tonight with a drink? With all this talk planned about 19th century design and aestheticism, I think it's only appropriate to start off with the Green Fairy herself, absinthe. Absinthe is a very strong distilled spirit flavored with anise and bitter wormwood, giving it what most describe as a flavor of black licorice. It was very popular within the artistic community in the late 19th century, with its admirers ranging from Van Gogh to Oscar Wilde. Today, we're going to make a classic drink that incorporates absinthe and egg white, absinthe à la Suissesse, or absinthe in the Swiss style. Absinthe à la Suissesse first came to prominence in the 1880s. Recipes vary, though most recipes include absinthe, orgeat syrup, seltzer, and egg white. To make it, combine all your ingredients except the seltzer in a shaker filled with ice. Now first, you're going to want 1.5 ounces of absinthe. Now this is real absinthe, which was banned in the US from 1912 to 2007, largely due to unfounded claims that absinthe caused drinkers to hallucinate or become violent. Now you can also use a less expensive, lower proof absinthe substitute like pastis or herb saint, but you'll want to increase the amount of spirit and then decrease the amount of sweetener. So we got 1.5 ounces right in here. And again, you know, those absinthe substitutes are a lot sweeter, lower proof, so add a little bit more and less of this next ingredient, orgeat syrup. Now this is a delicious almond syrup, which can be very easy to make at home. Dissolve 1/2 pound of sugar in a cup of unsweetened almond milk, and then add a tablespoon each of orange flower water and almond extract. It tastes similar to marzipan, and in addition to the absinthe Suissesse, it's also the essential ingredient in a Mai Tai. So if you're in the mood for tiki, make sure to either make or get yourself some of that. All right, so 1.5 ounces of that, which seems like a lot, but with strong absinthe, you want to balance that out with sugar. So now the egg white. Egg whites are a very common cocktail ingredient, which gives the final drink a delicate, frothy texture, almost like meringue. Now, if you're worried about the safety of raw eggs, you can use 1 ounce of pasteurized egg white, but the pasteurized stuff doesn't give you the same kind of lift that you get with the fresh stuff. So I have 1 egg white, or about 1 ounce here. Just put that right in the shaker. And then once all your ingredients are in here, you're going to want to shake vigorously. Now the more you shake it, the more you fluff up those egg whites and get that nice frothy texture. Give it a nice shake like that. Shake for a while. Now some bartenders will shake without ice first and then put the ice in to froth it up even more. But I'm just doing one shake like this. Keep shaking to get a nice arm workout. All right, that's good. good for TV purposes. All right, so remove the top of the shaker like that. This is our cobbler style shaker we sell in the Treehouse Museum store. And then strain into a tall Collins glass like this one. And even kind of go up a little bit. Kind of exaggerate the froth if you can. And again, if you shake longer, it'll get even frothier and get a nice little head on it. Okay. Now, in New Orleans, the Suissesse is still a traditional brunch drink, using the same ingredients but adding heavy cream and sometimes a little creme de menthe. Now, today we're going to follow the original earlier recipes and just top off the drink with a little bit of seltzer. So just give that, open that up. So you got a little bit of froth there. Again, don't want it to overflow. But yeah, now it's getting real, looks nice and creamy. Okay. And then for a final touch, just use a vintage style paper straw like I have here. Put it in your drink. That's the Absinthe Suissesse. Cheers. Now, joining us this evening is Chicago interior designer and founder of Bon Brise Design, Nancy Snyder. She should be here any minute, so let's go out and meet her. I hear she has a pretty sweet ride. Hi, Nancy.
Hello, Greg.
Glad you could join us today.
Thank you for having me.
Well, you came right at the right time. I just finished making some absinthe a la Suissesse inside.
Wow, isn't that the cocktail that has the big foamy top to it?
You know your cocktails. Yes, it is.
Well, there's actually a very interesting commonality between that beautiful cocktail and this gorgeous car.
Okay, seems a bit hard to believe, but I'll let you run with it.
They seem like very disparate items, but in fact, they both embody a trend of the day in the late 19th and early 20th century, a trend that actually became a movement called the aesthetic movement.
Okay.
The aesthetic movement actually was rallying against Victorianism with all of its conformities and its rigidness. And it was meant to evoke a life of creating beauty and art for art's sake. It was all about surrounding yourself in your everyday life with things of beauty and expressing your uniqueness. It was all about self-expression. It was prevalent in everything from literature to music, interior design to fashion. And it was all over America and Europe. During the early years, automobile designers had an idea of the car is getting you from point A to point B and is supposed to protect you. But about this time, automobiles sort of evolved into decorating their owners, really. They were supposed to emit personal, unique characteristics of the people inside of them.
Sure. And actually, the guy that designed the full racy paint job on this car and beautiful 1932 Ruxton was a guy by the name of Joseph Urban, and he was very prolific even outside of automobile design. He was an architect, he was an interior decorator, he even designed sets for the Metropolitan Opera.
And that's another commonality. What is the muse for design coming of its own age, and what is it that would inspire people? Often it was women's fashions.
Okay.
Interestingly enough, people watched the runways of Paris to see what the upcoming trends were. Automobile manufacturers, people that were decorating homes. And in the early 1900s, the design of everyday things was becoming more streamlined. Everything was becoming sleeker, like the car. And, actually, my dress is an example of that. This is from 1928.
Perfect.
And in the early days of the mansion, 1883, 1885, women would be wearing restrictive corsets and big bustles and a lot of material and lace. But by the time of the late 20s, the early 30s, the design became more streamlined. And that just took off everywhere in life. Everything was becoming more streamlined. So luxury vehicles, like extraordinary clothes and beautiful homes, They're really sort of meant to emit power and glamour, as well as the promise of escape and transformation.
Sure, and the 1932 Ruxton actually exemplifies that perfectly. You'll see that it's actually about 1.5 feet lower to the ground than other cars of this period, because it was the first passenger car equipped with front-wheel drive. So you eliminated the drive shaft that would normally go underneath the car. So it gave it this really racy appearance. And I mean, check out those headlights. They're called woodlight headlights. And they're not particularly bright, but they're very fashionable, and they were very popular around the late 1920s and 1930s. The car's low appearance eliminated the need for running boards, so that really further accentuated the kind of low, rackish nature of this car. It's meant to be a statement, really.
Well, you know, the transcendence of form over function. You gotta look good, right? The Nickerson Mansion does that too. It absolutely is a completely functional home to the nth degree, but everything is covered in with this notion of beauty, and everything is hidden under the beauty that was brought to life by this aesthetic movement.
Right.
In the best way. It was the largest home in Chicago, and it was meant to emit grandeur and wealth of its inhabitants. So right off the bat, everything about this home was about beauty, and that aspect is paramount in the design of this home. However, at its core, the structure of the home is completely functional, covered with this beautiful, undeniably gorgeous aesthetic to the building.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So we can talk about that a little bit more later. Should we go in and listen to some music?
Yes, that'd be lovely. Let's go inside.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to our third episode of Live from the Drawing Room. I am Patrick Donley, and I am delighted to be joined by Stephanie Pielok on violin this evening. We also have a few other guests. We have Peter Ho joining us on the piano, and Andy Schumm also playing piano later. And our guest Nancy Snyder is here to talk about a little bit of the home and our theme for the evening, which is the transcendence of form. We just played a prelude by Claude Debussy called The Girl with the Flaxen Hair, and we're showcasing in this first couple of pieces some of what was known as French Impressionist music. The next piece we're going to play is by Erik Satie, and I'll let Stephanie tell you a little bit about that.
Thank you, Patrick. It's a pleasure to be playing here in this environment. The piece Satie composed, first of all, it's the only piece that was composed for violin and piano. It was composed in 1914, and for that reason, I think the premiere was delayed because it was the beginning of the war. Now he likes to make fun. He was not enjoying to be put in a artistic box, and so he decided to make a sort of a mass with this piece, and he's making fun of a lot of usual procedures. For example, a lot of the markings, both for the piano and the violin, are quite absurd. It says, for example, to play from the back of your teeth. Like, if any violinists know what it means, I would be very interested to precisely know what it technically means.
I'll be honest, I kind of skimmed over some of these when I was first learning the piece, but then, yeah, once you brought it up, there are plenty of others too.
Yes, and they're very fun. But on the other hand, if you think about it, they kind of make sense, and you could imagine what they mean. For example, at some point it says, with dry bones, far dry bones. So you can imagine a dry sound, a percussive effect from the instrument, so it makes sense. Then at the end of the second movement, for example, because the piece, I should say first of all, is divided into three movements. There is a chorale hypocrite, which means a hypocritical chorale. Very interesting. Which I think makes fun of the verticality of usual Baroque music, slow movements. So it's very vertical. And it's very wide. The second movement is a fugue à tâtons, which means kind of guessing where you're going, right? So hopefully we're not going to be guessing where
like
we're
walking
going.
in the dark.
Kind of, exactly that. And the ending of this movement says, with wide sight, large de vue, which means wide sight. So we're going to try to do that.
Okay.
I don't remember where it said. Oh, yes, at the end of this movement it says as well, widening the head. So imagine that it means to expand the playing. And so there's a lot of fun effects. Turns out it's actually, we didn't plan on it, but the first piece was with violin mute that you can see here. So it prevents the too much vibration from the violin. The first movement of the Satie piece is going to be also with a mute. The second movement is unmuted, muted, and I think he also jokes around with the appliance of the mute, as you will discover at the very end of the piece, actually. And then the last movement is called a fantaisie musculaire. So it sounds like a body workout, actually, because it literally means like a muscular fantasy, like whatever that means. And So he uses and abuses like a lot of violin effects, whether it's bariolé in French, so the fact of playing on all the 4 strings, the use of pizzicato, the use of harmonics, lot of other things.
And just to jump in, one of the things that we're talking about is how design was initially functional, and then the beauty of things and the form of things started to kind of transcend those designs. So we're kind of exploring how in these compositions, it's been said that Impressionism, the Impressionist music is tensionless, sometimes tensionless harmony, or using dissonance as timbre. So I think that's happening in these 3 little pieces in this suite.
Yes.
And also it's called Chose vue à droite et à
That's
gauche.
the main title of the suite.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for reminding us that. Chose vue à droite et à gauche, sans lunettes. So that means literally things seen right and left, in parentheses, without glasses. So we hope you will have fun listening to it.
As we do.
Yeah, as we do playing it, right?
Okay, make sure I'm ready.
As I mentioned earlier, the structure of this home is in and of itself a study in creating an aesthetic overlay over an undeniably functional building. In 1879, when the design of this building was started by Burling and Whitehouse, Mr. Nickerson wanted to make sure of one very important thing, and that was that this home was as fireproof as possible. This is because he had lots of bad experiences with a lot of fire, including burning down his homes and his businesses. The Great Chicago Fire in 1871 had burned a structure here on this very lot. So paramount in his mind was this home not being able to burn down. So each floor in this home has an underlay of ironwork, and each room in this home is its own brick box. Floors, walls, ceilings, everything is encased in brick to make it as fireproof as possible. But in keeping with the aesthetic movement, every surface has an overlay of beauty. The floors are an overlay of parquet in a beautiful pinwheel pattern over the brick substrate. The walls are often tile or wood covered in this beautiful brocade silk fabric. Going further, the home has a convection heating system in the basement. This heating is brought up to the house through ductwork, of course, but each duct in every room is covered with this beautiful metal artwork. It's just amazing that they thought about every single detail. The craftsmanship is stunning. The fireplaces are actually not working fireplaces. They are meant to be things of beauty, and they are. Each room is different. They're stunning. But at most, they would hold a pot of coal to heat the room on coldest of winter days. When electric lighting was brought into the home for a mask ball, it wasn't just merely light bulbs screwed in wherever they could in the wood. No, these light bulbs were nestled in beautiful carved rosettes that are gilded and in and of themselves are really works of art. This is a fusion of form and a not so subtle announcement that this home had the latest of technology. So truly, this home, this mansion, embodies everything that there is to the idea of beauty transforming function. And like many of the mansions built in the 19th century, there was a partnership between architects and decorators. I use the term loosely because the field of decorating or interior design wasn't actually acknowledged until about 1905. Quite often, the decor of the interior of a room was left to furniture makers because they had an eye for scale and pattern. So it's interesting to think about this whole notion about interior design. In the early 1800s, a designed space was actually reserved for royalty, like Versailles. But by the late 1800s, the goal of having a beautifully designed interior was something that wealthy families like the Nickersons would aspire to. Now, part of the notion of interior design was that it was important for there to be a lot of different things to look at in a room. When the eye traverses a room, it should be met with many different styles and a lot of different color and a lot of different pattern. The principal decorator of this room was William August Fiedler, and he wanted to drive home this notion of beauty and self-expression that were so part of the aesthetic movement. So he promoted an eclectic style in the room, and in fact, he wrote about avoiding the monotony of basically the decor of the Victorian era, and he wanted to bring in elements of Byzantine and Moresque and Japanese styles, even though, and this is quoting him, he said it would be diametrically opposed to the style of the room. So he promoted this notion of eclecticism and self-expression. Now, the drawing room was actually finished by George Satie under the direction of Fiedler. And George Satie founded his own furniture making business and also got into decor. He was renowned and he did buildings all over the country. The room has some of the finest marquetry in the whole house. The flower and leaf marquetry border is so apparent and so beautiful. Right up at the ceiling, it's so intricately carved. It's stunning to look at. Right here, underneath the chair rail and above the baseboard, is beautiful inlaid wood. The room's ceiling, again, it's brick, but it's covered by a beautifully painted silk fabric and also parquetry above it that's just stunning to look at. at each door frame, there's pilasters that run from the chair rail up to the architrave, and they are the most gorgeously carved flowers and intricate wood. So everywhere you looked, beauty had to abound, even in the smallest of details. And all of this is just a layer that covers the functional core of a fireproof home that is outfitted with the latest technology. The symbolism in all of these carvings, and even in the room in general, is really quite lovely and a big part of the aesthetic movement. So it features vines and flowers and leaves, and namely it features sunflowers up towards the ceiling. Now, sunflowers symbolize adoration and loyalty. The ceiling is painted in 2 tones of green in a pattern of acanthus leaves, and acanthus leaves symbolize enduring life and immortality. The floor that I mentioned is a pinwheel parquetry, and that actually symbolizes serenity and resilience and perseverance, all of which are very fitting for Samuel Nickerson. I also have to point out this Tiffany lamp, the dogwood lamp. Now, when electricity was introduced and Tiffany was really known to be quite an artist of stained glass, he started making these shades for the lamps. It literally has very little to do with the light that could come from that lamp. The light bulb in it had everything to do with illuminating the beauty and the color and the intricate stained glass that eclipses the purpose of a light fixture. Tiffany said, "Color is to the eye what music is to the ear." Now, speaking of, let's listen to some wonderful music.
Thank you, Nancy, for that talk about the drawing room. I am here with Peter Ho. Welcome, Peter.
Thank you. Thank you, Patrick, for having me on this program.
It's a pleasure. So Peter has a couple pieces for us that he's going to play on the piano, but you brought some sheet music, is that right?
Yeah, absolutely. Figure with the talk about design, applied arts, technologies, lithography, this would be a nice little topic to tie everything together a little bit, which is sheet music, a pastime that I think is kind of lost. But yeah, I think it's, I want to showcase some sheet music today with you guys.
And it's also kind of fitting into the theme of what we've been talking about and how design is changing. And so what do you have there?
So I want to show you a couple of pieces. Now, here, there's in the 19 teens and 20s, there's a big change in sheet music design, going from some of the more simpler stuff in the past, like this, where you just have words and some flourishes, to something that's more and more closer to fine art, applied art, and then also a little bit of photography. Now, back in the day, when you go to a music store, you would go and buy sheet music, bring it home and play on the family piano. And so that was a nice little pastime that's, we don't do that much anymore today. But one conundrum when you go to a sheet music store is you might not know what you're there to buy. So sometimes you have to rely on, maybe it's a beautiful artwork on the front of the sheet music, and you'll purchase it because it's something nice to look at, in addition to something fun to play. So this here is something that's, you're starting to see, a little bit of art along with the title. And then here's a piece, Stardust. Of course, everybody's very familiar with it. One of the most popular pieces of the time, and also later on, it's become a jazz standard. So this is, yeah, I think it's a beautiful, beautiful piece. Now, just like today, and I'm no wine connoisseur, so sometimes when I go to a wine store, I'll pick up a bottle just because the label looks good. So I think this is a good analog of what people did with sheet music as well.
It's a nice
so
one.
Here's, yeah, Out of a Clear Blue Sky. And then other reasons people might pick up a sheet music is it may be a familiar song, or perhaps it's it comes from maybe it has a fun title. This piece has a if you look at the typography of this, there's a strong Art Nouveau tinge to it. It's a nice piece, Whispering.
Yeah.
And yeah, sometimes you'll pick up a song because you recognize the artist, recognize the composer. Walter Donaldson here is one of the more famous and prolific composers of the 1920s, and so maybe you'll go to a store and see Walter Donaldson and you'll pick it up. And then sometimes you'll see one that's a very familiar face. Bing Crosby, of course. Long before he did White Christmas, he was a popular music singer and jazz singer in the 20s and 30s. And so he, if you see this, you might say, "Oh, I recognize this guy. I'd like to pick this up." In New York, of course, there's Broadway and all the Broadway shows, and then the movie adaptations of these shows. Typically, you get a lot of music coming out of them. And here's an example of two that are identical, with different songs from the same musical. And I don't know if you can see, but there's if you zoom in quite a bit, you could see some of the artifacts from the imperfections of lithographic processes. So like the images don't exactly line up.
Oh.
Right? It's neat. But of course, people aren't examining a piece of sheet music for the perfection of the attempt at replicating photography. And here, this one, there's only two colors being used, red and black, and you can see some of the pink is made from dots. So yeah, these are some of the music from my personal collection, and I certainly enjoy collecting them as well as playing them. And many of these, anytime I have duplicates, I like to frame them just as artwork. So these are 100-year-old artifacts, and I certainly enjoy having them around the house.
Those are great. And I think some of our audience, and particularly maybe younger people, would see this and say, like, I don't really get what the big deal is. Yeah, of course, there's artwork on the sheet music, just like we have album cover art and everything else. Mm-hmm. But what we're kind of demonstrating is that when this started happening, it was new. Mm-hmm. To have, like there was a time when sheet music didn't really have interesting design and right. Interesting artwork, and for that matter, most things, mm-hmm. It was just a time when in a lot of different domains there was more intentional design coming in
right.
too. So yeah.
Yeah,
and that one's got a nice little thin line,
mm-hmm.
but that's about it. Much more subtle.
Right. So yeah, that was a time when you would bring home sheet music and play before the advent of radio or
right.
Even phonograph records. So this is how you bring popular music home with you if you wanted to hear it. No downloading, no live streaming back then.
Right. Very cool. I will leave you to it to tell the audience what you're going to play. And
sure thing.
Thanks again for being here.
Thank you for having me.
All right.
I'm going to play a piece by Gershwin. The glue that kind of ties George Gershwin to sheet music here is that if you go to a store that's got a song plugger, instead of just picking up a piece of music by looking at it, you can have somebody demonstrate the music for you. And so this job, the song plugger, was somebody that would be an in-house pianist at a sheet music store, and you would pick a piece of music, hand it up to the shopkeeper, and the shopkeeper would hand it up to the pianist on the mezzanine, and they would demonstrate it for you, give you a little preview before you brought it home. Now, a number of famous musicians we know were song pluggers before they made it big, including Irving Berlin, Chicago favorite Lil Hart Armstrong, as well as George Gershwin. Now, this next piece I'm going to play is called Prelude, Novelette in Fourths. George Gershwin had planned to do a series of 24 preludes, as many classical composers had done before him, including Debussy, whom we heard earlier, one of the preludes, and Chopin and so forth. I think Scriabin as well. So this piece is George Gershwin's Novelette in Fourths, written in 1919. I don't believe it was published, but I picked this off of a piano roll recording that he did. So I promise you this is me playing and not a piano roll playing. Thank you. That was George Gershwin's Novelette in Fourths. Another piece I'd like to play for you now is a piece by Beiderbecke. He was a cornet player from the 1920s and one of my favorite as well. Even though he was well known as a jazz cornet player, he was also a pianist and a composer and arranger. There's only a few recordings of him on piano, and this next piece is a piece from 1928 called In the Dark. This was his last composition that we know of, and this is another one that he never recorded. However, it was published thanks to the transcription efforts of Bill Challis, his friend, arranger, and colleague in the Gene Goldcat Orchestra. So this piece has a strong impressionist tinge to it, if you listen to it. And Bix was an admirer of the American Impressionist movement, and one of his dear friends was Eastwood Lane, whom we'll hear about later today. So Eastwood Lane would invite Bix over, and Bix would just sit on the couch and listen to Eastwood play. And so he was strongly influenced by American Impressionist music. And so this is his piece, In the Dark.
C'est magnifique.
It is becoming more clear how the beautification takeover found its way into everyday life of society, both inside the home and outside. The same artists generating this beautiful restaurant menus and jewelry and sheet music were also taking their art to the streets through advertisements. I remember the Driehaus Museum's 2017 exhibition, La Fishmania.
The passion for French posters.
Indeed. It perfectly conveyed during the Belle Epoque period this whole idea of aesthetic movement, the influence of Art Nouveau and the innovative color and the lithography technique, especially of Jules Cheret in the 1890s. It really conveyed the spirit of the day, the emphasis of beauty through colorful poster advertisements.
And products and events once sold on the streets of Paris through drab, wordy, black and white ads were instantly glamorous and more alluring as subjects of this new poster art. Not only were they a commercial success, but Cheret elevated posters to an art form that was embraced by the cultural elite like never before.
And that made them instantly collectible, which was a new thing. The posters beautified the boulevards of Paris, but more than that, they transformed everyday life. So the Parisians walking on their daily promenade down the sidewalk were met with a symphony of color and joy. And really, it brought this experience to the masses. It was real art for people that really hadn't been able to experience real art before. So truly, art for the masses.
And the craze for collecting them hasn't ceased. The exhibition here was so popular, it's now touring the country.
That's amazing. You know, Cheret's cheerful charettes sold everything from fashion to theater tickets to lamp oil. It still makes me smile.
And as the official designated cocktail guy, my favorite has to be this one. Punch can be found in all grand cafes.
I love that. I've always wondered what punch grasso was.
And I had always wondered that myself, so I did a little bit of research and, well, here, let me show you.
Oh.
Okay, so it turns out the recipe for punch grasso from the Jules Cheret poster features here in How to Mix Drinks by Jerry Thomas, a reprint of the world's first bartender guide from 1862. It's, I think, page 28. I'm gonna prove it to you. It's right here. Yes, punch grasso. Now, punch is one of the oldest mixed drinks around, introduced to England from India in the 17th century. It's thought that the word punch comes from the Hindi word for five, since early punch recipes contained 5 ingredients: alcohol, water, lemon, sugar, tea, or spices. Punch grasso was invented in 1858 by a French comedian and immediately became a huge hit, first in France and then worldwide. Its popularity waned in the early 20th century, which is why most people have never heard of it. But trust me, it is delicious and perfect for summer, especially if you like strawberries. So first, start off with a mixing glass full of ice. Now add 2 ounces of cognac. I'm using Pierre Ferrand 1840, which is formulated as closely as possible to the popular cognacs of the 19th century. So we're going to add 2 ounces. Nice healthy pour. I mean, it's really most of the drink is cognac. So 2 ounces of cognac. Now, Pierre Ferrand also makes a historically minded orange curacao, not the blue stuff, but an orange liqueur. And we're going to add in a teaspoon of that, just enough for some flavor. Perfect. Okay, so now you'll need to plan ahead a little bit. The Jerry Thomas recipe calls for strawberry syrup and instead of lemon or citrus juice, a drop of acetic acid. Now, acetic acid is what's in vinegar, and in the 19th century, it was common to make strawberries into a vinegar-based syrup called shrub. So add a cup of white wine vinegar to a pound of chopped strawberries. After 24 hours, strain them, add a half a pound of sugar to each cup of the strawberry vinegar, and it's a wonderful fruit syrup that can also be mixed with champagne or soda, really whatever you want. So for punch grisseau, add in 1/2 ounce of that strawberry shrub. And these are from fresh strawberries, and just look at how clear that is, like really bright red. So just 1/2 ounce of that, which is really just a great, nice flavor. And then 1/2 ounce just cold water, just a little bit to dilute the drink. You can smell the strawberries from all the way up here. Okay, 1/2 ounce of water. So if you've joined us before, you'll remember how many of our classic cocktails require a little bit of lemon peel squeezed over the top of the glass, over the drink, to express fragrant lemon oil. Punch grisseau uses a similar principle, but we're going to use more lemon peel, and instead of just squeezing it over the top of the glass, we're going to incorporate it into the drink. So peel about 1/2 a lemon with a vegetable peeler. Avoid the white pith in the middle. There's just one little piece. And then just squeeze it over your mixing glass like you would over the top of a drink. You give it a little tear and drop it in. So do that, about 4 big peels like this. Really just kind of 1/2 of your lemon. And it gives it that nice fragrant lemon oil. And the vinegar and the shrub, really, it gives it a little bit of tartness, but not a ton. So it's really, kind of a mild flavor, but you get the strawberries and the lemon peel. It's really, really nice. This is one of those drinks that just seems to have been lost to history. I don't think I've seen it being mixed anywhere or on any menus, except for these old, dusty, historic drinks manuals. So this is a little piece of history right here. Okay, so stir the drink to fully incorporate that lemon oil. And kind of push them down. You can always tear them into smaller bits so they mix in a little better. But when you mix like this, really kind of incorporating that lemon oil into the drink, not just sitting on top, but it's giving it a lot of flavor. And I know it sounds weird to say oily in terms of a drink, but it kind of gives it a little more body, it gives a little more oiliness to the drink, so it doesn't feel just like water. A nice pink color there, that's very nice. All right, that's enough. So just strain this into your glass, and that is pretty much it. I don't know if you can see this from here, but you can see the kind of swirls from the lemon oil, like mixing around in with the drink. It's really, really lovely. So that is punch grisseau, and get ready to hear some music from Andy Schumm. Don't touch that dial. And cheers.
Thank you, Greg, for that demonstration. I'm here with Andy Schumm. Welcome.
Thank you.
To the drawing room.
Thank you.
Andy's going to play a couple pieces for us, and we're going to talk a little bit about what was happening in the 1920s with musicians and some of the musical developments that took place. You're going to play a piece by Eastwood Lane, is that right?
Yeah, Eastwood Lane, early American impressionist style composer.
And what about his music would you say, qualifies that characterization?
He sounds, he's a piano composer generally, and he sounds like a French impressionist, but American. And whatever that is, I'm not quite sure what the tangible thing that is, but he's a little bit different school.
Yeah, I've heard it called, I've heard people say that like very open kind of harmony, and I heard threw that term out earlier, tensionless. So
yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And his most famous piece is called the Adirondack Sketches. It's probably his most famous because the jazz guys at the time were really digging that piece of music. And if you listen to a lot of records from the 20s, you can hear little bits of these pieces put into jazz records and dance band records.
And it kind of was a thing that happened for a little bit and then kind of.
Yeah, it's one of those classic dead ends of music, which, you know, and one of those things that more or less got killed off by the Depression, Great Depression.
Right.
Music got a little more commercial in those days, just to sell. Money was a little bit tight, so these kind of experimental things kind of evaporated. But this is definitely something that is worth exploring a little more.
Yeah, and sometimes I think about you know, how even at that time, like a band would be functional, you know, serving a purpose for dancing, but then they'd have their kind of things that they would do that were a little unique. And,
you kind of fool the audience a little bit.
Uh-huh.
Put some little crazy in there that they wouldn't know the difference.
Every once in a while,
yeah. Just a little bit here and there.
Still happens a little bit nowadays at the Green Mill and stuff when we
That's
play
right.
up there. All right, well, I'll leave you to it, and thanks again for being here.
Great, thank you.
All right.
Yeah, great to play in this great space, historic building in Chicago. Like I said, I'm going to play a little bit of a piece written by Eastwood Lane, 1922. The piece is called Adirondack Sketches. It's 6 movements. I'm going to play the last one for you, and this kind of documents or the impressions of life in the Adirondacks in the turn of the century, and things called like the old guide story and the legend of Lonesome Lake and these kinds of things. Really open sounding music, and they're more or less tone poems. So a tone poem would be a more or less structureless piece, kind of meanders from beginning to end, maybe little repeats here and there, but not much. It's kind of more of a little story, and they're not very long. And actually with this piece of music, some plain sheet music on this, but they came with little descriptions of what you're supposed to think about when you're playing these pieces. So this last one's called Lumberjack Dance, like I said, 1922, and I'm going to read a little description and see if this fits. All right, Eastwood Lane writes, Lumberjack Dance. After supper in the cook's shack, such as Paul Bunyan, that mythical and mighty figure of lumberjack lore, might have eaten. Pierre tunes up his fiddle, his swaying body and time-clicking boot are irresistible, and soon forgetting the intense cold and toil of the long day, each hardy woodman is pounding the rough floor with his spiked boots, suiting his steps and capers of his personal taste in intense need of rhythmical gratification. All right, the story like that, it's got to be good. All right, here we go. This is Lumberjack Dance, Eastwood Lane from 1922. That's Lumberjack Dance by Eastwood Lane, 1922. Eastwood was living in New York at the time, I believe. And like I said, many jazz musicians in New York and all over the country really admired his music. And he wasn't a jazz guy, but he had some tendencies that kind of lent himself to that style. And one of those people was, like Peter Ho mentioned, Beiderbecke, the great cornetist and composer and sometime pianist. And he used to go visit Eastwood Lane in the 1920s. And his widow later talked about how Bix would come over and just have a bottle of gin, and he'd flop on the couch and he'd just listen for hours and hours and hours. And that was his piano lesson. But Bix certainly picked up a lot of stuff from Eastwood Lane and like composers. I'm going to play something that's a little more on the jazz side now. Technically, it's called novelty piano. And novelty piano, sometimes called more generically Art Deco style piano. And this would be from the early 1920s to the end of the 20s. And it's definitely jazz, but it's got a lot of these harmonies and kind of nebulous, airy sounds. And like Patrick said before, it certainly was serving a purpose, a dance or just entertainment, but it was also incorporating some of these more sophisticated harmonies and rhythms of the time. And this one was written by the great Phil Napoleon, who's a great trumpet player, and Frank Signorelli, who was a very influential and important piano player in the early 1920s with Bix Beiderbecke, of course, and the original Memphis Five, many great groups. So this one's called Go, Joe, Go, novelty piano solo from 1927. Here we go. Go, Joe, Go.
What a wonderful evening.
I have to agree. I learned so much today about how the importance of form rather than just mere function has, influenced our everyday lives, from the aesthetic movement on to even the industrial design of today.
It's so true. And this home just embodies the whole aesthetic movement and the transcendence of form. Beauty overlaid every bit of function so that you didn't have to see all of that. Everything from cars to cocktails to interior design to fashion to music.
Right.
And the whole evening really encompassed that.
Yeah, and we really want to thank all of our viewers tonight for all of the donations that have come in to make today possible. And, let's do another one sometime.
I look forward to it.
All right, well, I think the best way to cap off the night would to be have all of our musicians come in and, play a piece all together, just, tie in all of those strands.
What a joy. Let's listen.
Is this okay?
We are back for one final piece. Thank you all so much for joining us. Thank you to Andy, Stephanie, Peter, Greg, Nancy, to the Richard H. Treehouse Museum, Anna Musi, Liz Tillmans. We're having a wonderful time doing this, and special thanks to Alex Briscano, who you don't see, but is operating many different devices to make this happen. We're going to play this piece. It's a new arrangement that I just adapted for this ensemble because three of us play different instruments. It is called Humpty Dumpty. I called Andy and said I was looking for something for, an ensemble to play that was from the 20s and had some of these sonic characteristics that we've been talking about tonight. So we settled on this, and it was written by Fudd Livingston, played by the Frank Trumbauer Orchestra, and featured Bix Beiderbecke. So here we go. Everyone ready?
Yep.
All right, so let's see. One, two, three. And before we leave you for the evening, we've just learned that Richard H. Driehaus himself is celebrating a birthday this week. So we want to wish him a very happy birthday with this. 1, 2, Thank you and good night.